What if the safest investment in America is actually a crime scene? Howard Marks, co-founder of Oaktree Capital, managing $150 billion, has navigated 50 years of booms and busts. Warren Buffett rushes to read his memos. Marks argues that decades of good times have bred two dangerous clues. Quote, cockroach loans thriving in the dark and distorted fingerprints on the S&P 500. As he puts it, the worst of loans are made in the best of times. Let's examine the evidence.
When two things happen, they tend to think it's a pattern. So they extrapolate it and they get worried about it. And I think, as I said in the memo, I think the importance of the development is that it shows you how cyclical psychology is. Because, everything's been going quite well in the markets with a few minor exceptions for 17 years now, going back to the end of 2008 and the end of the global financial crisis. And so when things go well for 17 years, people let down their guard, they lose their risk aversion, they stop being careful, they stop being skeptical, they stop doing thorough due diligence. And so bad deals get done. It's as simple as that. That's the importance of the experience. It's a reminder that in good times, bad deals get done. And that's what happened. That's why these credits, these companies should not have been able to borrow money. Yet they were, because we were in bullish times, you see. And I say in the memo that there's an old saying in the banking business that the worst of loans are made in the best of times, because good times distract the analyst from being skeptical and pessimistic and risk averse. And that's not a good thing. It is risk aversion that makes the market safe and sane. And when people forget to be risk averse, and when they start worrying about missing out more than they do about losing money, then the market becomes a dangerous place.
Hearing the worst loans are made in the best of times made my stomach drop. It reminded me of February 2007, when New Century Financial, a subprime lender in Irvine, California, announced surprise losses. Most folks shrugged it off. 18 months later, the entire housing market imploded. Since 2009, the S&P 500 climbed about 720%. We had only brief panics like the 2020 crash that were quickly forgotten. An entire generation of investors has never weathered a prolonged storm, so they started leaving the front door unlocked at night. Now here's where it gets unsettling. The cockroaches are scurrying into view. Just this past year, several regional banks surprised Wall Street by confessing to catastrophic loan losses. Their stocks tanked overnight. Jamie Dimon put it bluntly, when you see one cockroach, there are probably more. He was talking about banks, but it applies everywhere. Cast your mind back to the Silicon Valley Bank fiasco of 2023. For years, SVB was the darling of tech finance, floating on easy money and startup deposits. Then, on March 8, 2023, they announced a $1.8 billion loss on bond sales, a desperate attempt to plug holes. Within 48 hours, depositors yanked $42 billion. By Friday morning, the FDIC had seized the bank. Gone. Two more banks fell like dominoes that same week, and First Republic had to be rescued in a fire sale. These institutions gave out loans that only made sense in fantasy land. Ultra-low rates, tech boom forever, no storms on the horizon. If a deal only works in perfect conditions, it's probably a bad deal. Imperfect conditions never last. Now let's put some numbers on this complacency. An analysis by the Associated Press found nearly 7,000, quote, zombie companies worldwide, about 2,000 in the U.S. alone. These are firms so debt-laden they can't even pay the interest on their loans from their actual business earnings. They've survived only because for years, money was virtually free. With interest rates now the highest in 15-plus years, their day of reckoning approaches. Many of these zombies collectively owe hundreds of billions of dollars coming due soon. How will they pay it back at 6 or 8% interest if they couldn't at 2%? Short answer, they won't. U.S. corporate bankruptcies have surged to a 14-year high, levels we haven't seen since 2009. And this is before any official recession has hit. Companies are going bust at a rate typical of a crash, even while headlines claim the economy is fine. So far, we focused on loans and debt, the cockroaches scurrying in dark corners. Now let's turn on another light. What about stocks? Marx points to a giant, glaring fingerprint. The S&P 500 index is not what it appears.
So you probably would not weight the stocks based on their market value, which is what it is today.
Right.
Maybe you'd weight it on earnings or something like that, or maybe you'd do equally weighted. But if it's not much of a 500 stock index if seven of them are 40%, right? 1.4% of the stocks are 40% of the index. That's not very representative. But other than that, I mean, the interesting thing, which I mentioned in another memo earlier this year, is that the 7 stocks, the so-called Magnificent 7, are overweighted, but not insanely expensive. I mean, they have PE ratios, which is the main metric for expensiveness, valuation. They have PE ratios in the 30s. And that's high, but not crazy, in my opinion. These are great companies. And I would, if I had to opine, which I don't have to do because it's not my business, but if I had to opine, I would say that the Nifty 50 are not overpriced at 30-something times earnings. When I came into the business as a young man at age 29, when I got out of Chicago, there was a bubble in what were called the Nifty 50, the 50 best and fastest growing companies in America. And they were selling at PE ratios between 60 and 90. So 30 doesn't seem very expensive to me. You see where I'm going.
Right.
But what I think is high is the PE ratio on the other 493 companies, which averages around 20 or 19. The historic average for the S&P is 16, and that includes the highest valuation, highly represented, overweighted stocks. So obviously the not highest valued, highest represented stocks, PE ratios might have averaged 14 or 15, and today they're close to 20. So that seems very high to me.
This turned my thinking upside down. Actually, let me be more precise. It inverted it. Everyone's been yelling about Apple, Google, and Nvidia being in a bubble. But Marx is saying the leaders might be fairly valued. It's the other 493 stocks that are overpriced. Could the real bubble be lurking in the, quote, safe, boring part of the market? Let's break down this concentration. Think of your portfolio as a pie. 500 slices for 500 stocks. Sounds diversified, right? But 32.6% of that pie, roughly 1/3, is taken up by just 7 mega-cap tech slices as of mid-February 2026. Apple and Microsoft alone make up approximately 11.19% of the total index. Throw in Nvidia, Alphabet, Amazon, Meta, and Tesla, and you've got a massive portion of the S&P 500's value resting in just 7 companies' hands. One stock like Nvidia now has so much influence that if the Magnificent 7 were to drop just 5%, the remaining 493 stocks in the index would need to gain 2.7% just for the S&P 500 to stay flat. In this market, if these giants sneeze, the entire index catches a cold. Now layer on valuations. A PE in the 30s for the top 7 companies might be justifiable if they continue to grow. These are companies reshaping entire industries. But a PE of 20 for the average of the rest? Many of these are slow growth, old school businesses. Historically, a market PE of 20 is what we saw during bubbly times. By the end of 2023, the overall S&P 500's PE ratio was around 23, far above the century-long average of 16. And by one estimate Mark cited, buying the S&P at a 23 times PE may doom you to something like 0% annual returns for the next decade. Why would average companies be priced so expensively? The same reason bad loans got made: optimism and a lack of fear. When everyone is bullish, Money flows even into mediocre opportunities. Investors started buying anything with a ticker symbol, confident that stocks only go up. We have an index where even the smaller fish are priced like they're special when many are not. That spells risk. There's no margin of safety if something goes wrong. So what can an everyday investor do with these clues? First, don't ignore them. Stay skeptical of too good to be true opportunities. Second, consider diversifying beyond overcrowded U.S. tech stocks. Mark's hinted that money wants to be in the U.S., but there are markets out there that aren't trading near 20 times earnings. Some non-U.S. indices aren't dominated by tech and might have more reasonable valuations. That doesn't mean flee the S&P 500, but be aware of what you actually own. Long periods of market calm often end not gently, but with a storm. It could be this year, next year, or who knows when. But now you and I have seen the clues that most people ignore. For a deeper dive into recognizing hidden dangers, check out our next video where Monish Pabrai warns of a lost decade for stocks. I will see you over there.